Oh yeah, what do you think about that new intro logo? It's pretty cool, huh?
I love it. Do you create that yourself?
Yeah, it was. I created it in my mind with Fiverr. So, welcome back, everybody, to the Justin Thurber Show. As always, I'm your host, Justin Thurber, and my co-host extraordinaire, Jimmy Davis. How we doing today, Jimmy?
Doing good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, everyone listening or watching, you really want to hold on to later, or skip to the part where we have Dan Fitzgerald, a registrar in Massachusetts, a registrar of voters. Awesome interview. Something I think most people would sit there and kind of be like, yeah, registrar, who cares? But man, it was a fascinating interview. Learned a lot, and actually probably a very important function in our government that not a lot of people know or understand. So it's very interesting, highly recommended. And just listen to that later. So again, what we're going to try to start doing is doing, in case you missed it, where we're going to go over news stories or things that happened around the world that you might have missed in the last week. And this story is about Manchester public schools who told parents who don't like their secrecy policy they can take their kids and leave. And again, this is one of those things that just blow my mind. So I'm going to read some of this article, but what's going on is when your kid goes to school, the schools are sitting there and saying, "Hey, listen, you basically your kids are our kids, and we're going to hide things from the parents." So let me read a little bit of this story, and we can discuss it. All right, do this. During oral arguments in a lawsuit over its policy of keeping parents in the dark about their children's behavior, the Manchester School District's attorney told the state Supreme Court that parents shouldn't be able to challenge the district's policy. Instead, they should pull their kids out of public school and go somewhere else. If parents want to make a different choice, they can homeschool or they can send their child to a private school. Those are options available to them, said attorney Megan Glynn. The district is being sued over its policy of keeping students' behavior related to sex and gender secrets from their parents. So let me read that. Let me read that again. The district is being sued over its policy of keeping students' behavior related to sex and gender secret from their parents. I mean, like, isn't this things we tell our kids when they're young? Like, hey, listen, your mom and your dad, they're the ones that you go to. Don't talk to strangers about this. The good touching, the bad touching, the not who to talk to. And all of a sudden now your kids go to school and they're like, your parents can't be trusted.
It's funny. It's almost like every week we have an issue related to schooling pop up on the show, and that's not intentional. It's just every week there seems to be another hot button issue that's happening in the school system, which is interesting.
Well, I do have a theory about this, Jim. Um, you know, over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot of pundits out there talking about the rise of a new conservative age and the belief that in a generation or two, 10 to 20 years, that conservatives were going to way outnumber any other party just because of what typically conservatives do. They get married, they have families, two or three kids, where a lot of other like liberals, Democrats, what they're starting to do, whether it be for because of climate change, whether it be because of, you know, they just doing things to their body which stop them from having children, they're not having kids. And I think what happened is when we were sitting here getting excited, like, hey, listen, if we're a rebel, we keep having kids, they sat there and like, oh my gosh, we're gonna be extinct or we're gonna go away. So I think there's been an all-out press to get our kids while they're in the school system. And again, I hate to say this too. I hate to say like it's a money thing too, but they take our money in taxes and we want them to do the right thing, which is educate our kids with a good education. And you know what they do? They take our money and like, we're going to educate your kids and you have no say.
Yeah, and I wonder if they really thought this one through too, because every single town in Massachusetts has a school committee that has elected members to it, and like,
Hmm.
so what does that mean going forward? I mean, that the school committee is a great opportunity for parents that have concerns or anything that their kid brings home, that they can actually speak to the school committee directly and present what's their concerns are, whether they're
Right.
legitimate or not. It's a great platform for them to express their feelings. And essentially what this is saying is that there's no purpose for the school committee, or at least that function of the school committee, of like listening to parents and how to improve the curriculum, is no longer going to be part of what a school committee does. Essentially, they're just going to shut that off to the public. I mean, that would be very concerning in my eyes.
Okay, so again, like you said, there's these themes that seem to be coming out, and again, they're not planned. We're not sitting here like, let's do this. But we've discussed this earlier. One of the reasons why I became a politician or got involved in politics is because when I went to my school committee, I realized they're neutered. You sit there and you're telling them as parents, we don't want these policies. And they're like, oh, that's too bad because this unelected bureaucracy up in Boston sits up there and tells us what we have to do. And you're like, but if that's how it works, then why are we electing you? And again, that's when it opened my eyes to the fact that the government has flipped it 180. They have the illusion that you have a say by voting and by being able to go and talk to these people. But in the end, the people you elect, if they don't have a backbone to push back and fight back against an unelected bureaucracy, what do you got?
That's
You
exactly right.
don't have a
That's
say.
like a lot of the town committee meetings too. To be honest, it's like you get a forum to present your grief or whatever. You get to gripe in front of the town committee, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really have an impact on the decision. I mean, really, sometimes if all the parents in the town, or a huge portion of them, stand up at the same time and shoot down an issue, then sometimes it'll have an influence. But for the most part, it's just, if only one or two parents stand up, it pretty much just falls on deaf ears.
Yeah, and one of the other things that I hope that people start realizing and start talking to other people about, and this is the big one that really, really gets me, is the government takes our money through taxes, okay, and then they're supposed to use it for things to help everybody. But what they actually do is they use that money against us. They hold it over us. When you go to a school committee, when you go to a board of selectmen meeting, and there's something on there, and you're like, hey, listen, I don't want to do this. And like, well, if we don't do this, we don't get this money. And everyone's like, oh, we need that money. Whose money is it? It's our money. What do you? And this is where I have a problem with it. I think what has to happen, what I love to see happen, is I would love, and we talked. It was funny. We talked to Dan a little bit, after we recorded the video with him. It just talking about some things. And one of the things that he said, which I think I agree with and you agree with, is a lot of these towns feel isolated. And because they feel isolated, the government loves it, because if you're isolated, you don't feel like you can do anything. And I hope what happens, I hope towns start reaching out to other towns and saying, listen, we don't want to do this. Do you want to do this? And if the other town says, hell no, we don't want to do this. You get 4 or 5 towns telling the government, hey, listen, we're not doing this. It's over. It's over.
States did that with the trans athletes in women's sports. A lot of states got together and said, hey, we don't want the NCAA tournament in our state if you're going to be allowing males to compete in women's sports. And they, instead of one individual state, it was like a combined group of states. So yeah, combined, their voices are a lot louder than individually.
Well, it's not just that. I think what happens, you have 4 or 5 towns that would speak up and tell the state we're not doing this, and then the state goes, oh yeah, well, we're going to withhold funds. You have how many people usually a typical town? 20 to 40,000 people,
Yeah.
sometimes more. You have 200 or 300,000 people pissed at you, and not only just pissed at you, a lot of those people are going to realize that the state's a lie. How their government is supposed to work is a lie, and they don't want that. They don't want to see like these people are understanding that the process that they thought was in place for their voices to be heard really isn't in place. And if people start noticing that, there's going to be big changes. And I hope they watch this show, and I hope they realize that's what's happening, because we need to. So let me keep reading this story, because again, it blows my mind that, like I said, we're going through this and that parents don't get a say. But so Richard Lehman, the attorney for the Manchester mother going by Jane Doe, who filed lawsuit, said parents have the right to know if their children are being socially transitioned in schools with the aid of school staff. And I'm going to tell people out there, this isn't just happening in New Hampshire. This is happening all throughout Massachusetts, all throughout Rhode Island, all throughout Connecticut. It's happening in a lot of schools. Obviously it's happening in California, maybe most blue states and some red states. So, Richard Lehman, the attorney for the Manchester mother, going by Jane Doe, who filed a lawsuit. Oh, well, that's the second one. So the real issue is not a school reporting on what a student is doing in school, but for the school to report what the school itself is doing in school. Yes, the school should say we're doing this, because I think if more parents found out, like, hey, listen, when your kid comes here, and if they're struggling through something, and we're gonna support them and hide it from you. And it's funny. I was doing some research on this, and I found a funny meme. If they were secretly baptizing kids in school, would people be okay with it? And I wouldn't. As a Christian, I wouldn't. That there's no place for that. There's no place for that. There's no place to be hiding transitions from kids. If my kid happened to be anorexic and they're like, listen, I don't want to eat, and they say, okay, we're not going to let you eat in school. No, we don't do that stuff. That's between the parents. And again, I think this is that little bit of encroachment that if we accept this is the other thing. If we accept the government doing this, they're just going to keep taking more and more, and they're trying to replace the parents. And what's happening is you have these people out there that say, hey, listen, my ideas, my beliefs are more important than your parents' ideas and beliefs, because your parents' beliefs are dangerous. Well, no. It has to stop. Let me continue reading, then we can talk a little more. Lehman rejected the argument that the lawsuit was an attempt to force the district out of LGBT students to their parents. He argued it's about government entity usurping parental powers and making decisions in place of a parent. Perfect. That's what they want to do. Oh, you're anti this. You're against the LGBT. No, we're not. But the government doesn't have the right to take the place of a parent, and it never should. And this is something that it's unbelievable. We're even at this point in society. So,
wouldn't it be great if schools got back to teaching like science and engineering and math and all these other things? Like these are really where the conversation should be about. But it's like instead we've gone this completely other direction. Now
yes.
We're talking about all this social stuff, which it's.
Well, if here's one of the things we tell our kids, right? If you have to hide something from somebody, it's probably not good.
No.
Let me get to this other part. Here's a wonderful part of this. The policy states teachers and staff are not to tell anyone about a child's gender identity without the express consent of the child. School employees are also directed to use child's biological pronouns and given name when talking about the child to people who do not know about the non-conforming gender identity. So what you're saying is, and here's the thing is, we don't even talk about some of the teachers who don't want to participate in this. Like, I'm sure a bunch of teachers don't want to lie to the parents. They don't want to sit there and be like, hey, Jenny's doing great, but at school she's called Joe and I call her Joe. So, and not only that, but now you're asking teachers to have to sit there with however many kids and what do I call them now? And if the parent calls me up and I have to remember this, like, no, we shouldn't be in the business of having people lie to our kids and our family. It's just disgusting to me. I apologize.
Yeah. Well, how about this? I mean, we have cases too where when the schools are able to run with this stuff without any sort of transparency. I mean, you have parents showing up at graduation day for high school, and they're finding out that their kid is no longer, Johnny. They're now Stephanie at
Yes.
graduation day, and that's happened, and it is happening. And the parent is the person most invested in that child. I mean, throughout their entire life, they know the child the closest, and it's just to cut them out of the picture completely is just a big mistake.
So really quick, just to finish this up, right? Because it's supposed to be in case you missed it, it's supposed to be kind of quick. There's, like I said, all these underlying themes, and I really like these underlying themes that we have in our shows because we need people to realize there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of bad stuff, but listen to the statement, and I'll bring it back home. On Friday, the Manchester school staff and officials they said they did not lie to the mother about her child's gender identity. They simply followed policy.
That sounds like a cop-out to me.
No, it's not even a cop out, right? This is where my don't outsource your thinking came from. This is where, like I told you, when I sat there and I talked to the school committee and I was telling them, hey, listen, you know, simply following orders is not a good enough excuse. And I hate to say it, the Milgram experiment, people look up the Milgram experiment. We've talked about this before. The Milgram experiment was a psychologist after World War II could not believe that people committed atrocities. And everyone he talked to of the people that committed these atrocities against other people, when he asked them, how could you do this? They said, I was just following orders. And he's like, bullcrap, that can't happen. You can't tell me that someone told you to commit these atrocities and you did it. And they're like, well, we were following orders. So he did study after study after study. And 80% of the people, if they could outsource their responsibility to people in position of authorities, or there was a law in place, they would commit atrocities. And this is what we're doing. And this is what we're teaching kids. Oh, just follow orders. No, it's wrong. It's wrong. People have to step up. That's not an excuse. So I hope, like I said, people really look into the Milgram experiment. I think that should be required teaching. I think with all this psychology and stuff we want to teach kids that following orders leads people down a really, really bad path where you do really bad things like committing atrocities or hiding things from parents. So, all right.
I hope some of the parents take them up on their offer to homeschool and go to private school, because I think that's really where it's going to be honest.
Well, here's the thing: is a lot of states, and I'm kind of getting on board with this, are going to start funding students and not school systems.
Yep.
And I don't know if New Hampshire's going to be one. I doubt Massachusetts or Rhode Island will be one. But I think what has to happen is, like, there has to be that process where parents have a right to say, listen, I want my kid just to learn his math, English, science, the social emotional stuff. We didn't have to have all this stuff that you're providing kids. We made out fine. Let them figure it out. And if you can't do that, I will go to a different school. And I think that would be a great thing to do, but who knows? Hopefully, like I said, some states already do it, so maybe they'll have to move to those states. One story I really wanted to talk about was this 12-year-old named Liam in Massachusetts who went to school with a shirt that said there are only two genders, and I guess he kind of got in trouble. So we're going to start out with the video of him talking. And the real reason I don't really like showing kids too much on this, because, I think kids should be left alone. So, but there was a woman who spoke a week later, and she was very eloquent, very well spoken, and I think she hits the nail on the head. So I really want to get to that. But let's start off with what Liam said.
I never thought that the shirt I wore to school on March 21st would lead me to speak with you today. On that Tuesday morning, I was taken out of gym class to sit down with two adults for what turned out to be a very uncomfortable talk. I was told that people were complaining about the words on my shirt, that my shirt was making some students feel unsafe. Yes, words on a shirt made people feel unsafe. They told me that I wasn't in trouble, but it sure felt like I was. I was told that I would need to remove my shirt before I could return to class. When I nicely told them that I didn't want to do that, they called my father. Thankfully, my dad supported my decisions and came to pick me up. What did my shirt say? 5 simple words. There are only two genders. Nothing harmful, nothing threatening, just a statement I believe to be a fact. I have been told that my shirt was targeting a protected class. Who is this protected class? Are their feelings more important than my rights? I don't complain when I see pride flags and diversity posters hung throughout the school. Do you know why? Because others have a right to their beliefs just as I do. Not one person, staff, or student told me that they were bothered by what I was wearing. Actually, just the opposite. Several kids told me that they supported my actions and that they wanted one too. I was told that the shirt was a disruption to learning. No one got up and stormed out of class. No one burst into tears. I'm sure I would have noticed if they had. I experience disruptions to my learning every day. Kids acting out in class are a disruption, yet nothing is done. Why do the rules apply to one yet not another? I feel like these adults were telling me that it wasn't okay for me to have an opposing view. their arguments were weak, in my opinion. I didn't go to school that day to hurt feelings or cause trouble. I have learned a lot from this experience. I learned that a lot of other students share my view. I learned that adults don't always do the right thing or make the right decisions. I know that I have a right to wear a shirt with those 5 words. Even at 12 years old, I have my own political opinions, and I have a right to express those opinions. Even at school, this right is called the First Amendment to the Constitution. My hope in being here tonight is to bring the school committee's attention to this issue. I hope that you will speak up for the rest of us so we can express ourselves without being pulled out of class. Next time, it may not only be me. There might be more students that decide to speak out. Thank you for your time and good night.
Thank you.
All right, so that was very well spoken. And again, we can always debate whether the parents helped him, whether he wrote it. He was 12 years old. But here's one of the issues I have. One of the issues I have is that we as parents now have to send our kids to school on both sides, on all sides, on all these issues, and kind of have our kids be the fighters for us. Like, hey, you have to go to school, and we have this set of beliefs, and we want you to go to the school and try to not be a bad person, right? Obviously, you don't ever want your kid to be a bad person, but also try not to be corrupted by other people's beliefs that you don't want them to be corrupted with. And I think there's all these different sides, there's all these different things going on in the schools, and these kids are, all of them are fighting these unwinnable wars. And the biggest reason is because parents aren't doing what they're supposed to do. They're not pushing back. They're not demanding accountability from their schools. They're not demanding accountability from the school committees. They're not sitting there and like, listen, I shouldn't have to go to my kid shouldn't have to go to school and have to deal with all these social problems that we're not even fixed in the real world. Like the school should be a safe space where those kids just go, let them do what they want, let them figure it out, let them make their friends, and we're not going to pick those friends for them. They're going to have to learn all that themselves just like we do. But you know what we do? We sit there and we move the pieces. We push these pieces. We say, you people have to do this, and you people have to do this, and we're screwing up kids. We're screwing up kids on so many levels too, because what we're saying also is you have to accept this and you have to accept that, but you don't have to accept this and you don't have to accept that. And everything's equal, but everything's not equal. And hey, listen, for 1 month we celebrate these people, but we never celebrate you. And if you're going and you're like, well, I don't want to celebrate those people, they can do what they want, I don't care. Well, now there's something wrong with you. Why aren't you doing this or whatever? So I really think we're setting up our kids and we're confusing our kids, and we're doing it because, I don't know, because we're scared, because we're lazy, because we don't understand what we're doing to kids. But when they go to school, these kids are fighting. I had a friend of mine who sent his kids to private school. I guess he was one of the lucky ones, right? Like maybe Manchester, New Hampshire would like him. And he's like, the reason is because of this, Justin. In public school, they were surviving. In private school, they were thriving. And it's simple. Because in the private school, they're like, we don't care about the BS. We're just here to teach you. You figure it out. But in public school, they're trying to find all this equity and equality. And when you start pushing those levers, you start tilting things, then it tilts, and you're constantly going this, and that creates disruptions, and kids are trying to figure things out. And as parents, we're like, oh, this, oh, that, and teachers, it's just way too much for them, and their brains are developing. They shouldn't have to worry about this. And again, if the parents want to figure things out, let's figure things out. If we want to talk, let's talk. If you have an issue with something, let's come and talk to me. Let's go hash it out with the school committee. Let's hash it out with the principal. But don't make your kids be the people that have to fight the wars because we're too chicken crap to do it ourselves.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we see it all over the place, the culture wars that are being fought. And it's sad that it's moving down into the schools at this point too, because what it does is it creates this like us versus them mentality.
Yes.
Right from the beginning, where it's like, when I was in school, none of this stuff was being played out in the school system. So like I had friends that I grew up with that I still talk to, and now that some of these things are becoming more, part of the culture battle, like I have friends that have different views, that some support it, some don't, but it's like, hey, we were friends first before a lot of these things came about. Where what this is doing now in the school system is it's creating that us versus them mentality right from the beginning. So that kid's never gonna be friends with someone that thinks differently than him on one of those issues. And that's kind of how it's been designed. And actually, in one of the school committee candidates brought up a really good point. He goes, in the school system, the schools are creating all these different groups and all these different segments of kids. It's like, okay, these kids are part of a minority, or they're like part of a certain class of people, and it's like they're dividing kids into all these groups to promote inclusion, let them know they have like a safe group. But nobody's going around to all the groups and saying, hey, how are we going to bring these kids back together again? Like, what are we going to do to make sure that these kids are like socializing with each other? I mean, they should be like, you want kids to be friends, and this culture war going into the schools is just dividing people even more from at an even earlier age.
Remember years ago there was the video of the little white kid and a little black kid, and they're just running towards each other. They're like little babies, and they're giving each other a hug, and then they're hop, skipping, and jumping away and stuff. And again, to me, that's what it is. Like, kids don't care. Like, they just love their friends. I love my friend. He's great. And then what happens? You get into a school that's like, well, they've done this to your ancestors, or, oh, if they don't accept everything about you, they're not really your friends. And that's not true. That's not true. That's a lie. We got to stop that lie.
Right.
I have a lot of friends. I don't like everything about them. Trust me, there's a lot of people that don't like a lot of things about me, but we're friends because as humans, we have value. We all have value, and our job is to find the value in other people. And our job is also to say, hey, listen, there are certain people I don't find enough value in. I just don't spend time with them, but they're still people. And we take that opportunity away from these kids, and it's infuriating. And it's infuriating because there's a lot of parents that promote this crap, and there's a lot more people that are too afraid to go fight for their kids, because if I go in front of the school committee, people are gonna think I'm something. No, who cares? Your kid's fighting it every day.
I think it's that point where you can't ignore it anymore. Like you said, it's like you have to get involved. You have to push back at some level.
And the pushback is it's simple. There's gonna be a lot of people like, oh, Justin, that's just because you want this. No. You know what I want? I want my kids to go to school. I want my kids to get a good education, and I want my kids to figure it out. I want my kids to look at kids and make friendships based on the content of that person's character, instead of all these other superfluous little things, that all these little metrics we have to sit there and check. Oh, do they do this? Do they do this? Are they this? Are they that? No. Is the kid a good kid? Is my son making friends with a child because they're a good kid? Right? Maybe the kid starts out good and then he starts changing, and my kid has to learn that. Like, they have to learn. And what's happening is, like I said, you have teachers, parents, administration pushing the levers, and as you said, they're using the culture war in the school to divide us even more. And the politicians love this, because the politicians love that we're divided, because then what happens? You're my voter.
You're fighting each other as opposed to fighting them, really.
Yes.
Instead of people getting involved as registrar and all this other stuff. I mean, look how much time people spend on Facebook and all this other stuff, going back and forth at each other. And then meanwhile, these towns in the state are getting away with all this stuff, and nobody's even batting an eye, because we're all attacking each other and not pointing the energy at them.
Well, there was a mother who went to support this young man. A week later, I saw the video. Like I said, I'm going to play it for people to listen. I thought it was very well said, very well spoken. So let's see what she had to say.
I'm here to stand with Liam tonight because I feel that the Middleborough School and the community and their actions are failing them. He is being made an example and marginalized for his beliefs. He is told that his shirt states His shirt that states his belief that there are only two genders is a disruption and violates the dress code that implies hate speech towards a protected class. This is a manipulation of the words on his shirt, and imply has no place in the dress code, nor should hate speech only apply to those in a protected class. Hate speech is hate speech, and it applies to everybody. You created rules that only apply to certain children while exempting others from being held to the same standard. As I have said before, creating policy that establishes two sets of rules is segregation. If you allow shirts that state a belief that there are many genders, then you must allow a shirt that states there are two genders. Neither indicates hate towards another group unless you twist it by implying or inferring something to further your agenda. Both statements are a statement of belief, of which conflicting can peacefully coexist. His First Amendment rights do not end at the school door, and his 14th Amendment rights afford him equal protection under the law. Recognizing and honoring diversity is not demanding that one group's beliefs win over the others. It recognizes that our differences can be celebrated and peacefully coexist. One group should not be allowed to be loud and proud about their belief, while the other group remains silent. Nothing on his shirt was vulgar, threatening, or profane. He did not act in a way that was threatening. If people felt unsafe, it was not because of Liam's words or actions, but an incorrect inference. Children and adults need help understanding the difference between an actual threat that makes them unsafe and feeling offended that someone else dare challenge their belief. Does the cross around my neck apply hate to non-Christians who do not believe that Jesus is the Son of God? Does it make people who are Jewish feel unsafe? Who implies that? It's not me. I don't have hate in my heart, and I don't believe that it's okay for you to imply that this little boy has hate in his heart for anybody else. Superintendent Lyons, there are actual threats going on that are being ignored, disruptions in learning that are left unchecked. You are so busy taking action against a 12-year-old boy for words on his shirt that you have turned a blind eye to actual bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment that is occurring across this district. No effective disciplinary response has happened to prevent ongoing safety concerns from aggressors. The overarching message I keep hearing from this community is that you are concerned about the mental health and safety of children, but this is often in lockstep with the references to groups of one protected class. All children are at risk of bullying and harassment. All children are at risk of mental health struggles. All children are at risk for suicide and suicide ideation. And I have news for you. This is not a unique issue for the LGBTQ community. All parents have primary concerns about safety for their children.
Thank you.
Amen. Amen, right? Like, again, there's something I don't agree with, like the hate speech thing, because again, we've discussed in prior episodes about how there's really no such thing as hate speech. There's speech you might hate, but there's no such thing as hate speech. But again, she hits the nail on the head. If there shouldn't be a protected class, like when you start saying, "Hey, listen, this cross means that these people hate you," or this shirt means no, you're making that assumption. That's not reality. And again, I don't know if they understand they're doing that. I believe some people understand they're doing it. I believe the people that make these policies outside of the school committees, outside the school districts, at really high levels of government, that want to keep us separated, they know that they're doing this. I think we have to be smart enough to understand that they're using schools and our children to divide us. And what we have to do is sit together and say, listen, we need to peacefully coexist. What does that look like? And I think what's happened is, and I could be wrong, right? And this could be a broad generalization, but I think most conservatives over the year, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, Jim, most conservatives would sit there and be like, listen, I just want to be free to do what I want to do. And I want to be left alone and just leave me and my family alone. And that's freedom. That's what the American dream's about. I just want to be free to go pursue my dreams. I want to be free to live the life I want to live. But ever increasingly, there's encroachments on that. And ever increasingly, there's people saying, well, you can be free to do that, but you also have to believe what we believe and participate what we participate in. And when people push back against that, say, no, that's not how it works. Like, listen, dude, I don't care if you do this or do that. And they're like, well, you have to care and you have to celebrate it. No, I don't. And then what they do is they take that as an affront and we have to stop this, and you're an evil person. And the worst part is then you get the government involved, and the government sits there and like, yeah, we'll get involved because that gives us more power. And then what we can do is we can divide you and say, ooh, this person don't like you, I do, so vote for me. And they get away with doing whatever the hell they want because we're too stupid, or we're not adult enough to sit back and have hard discussions. I don't even think they're hard discussions, but for some people they're hard discussions, right? Because I'm religious and you're not religious. So what? Do you want to do what you want to do? Yes, do it. I don't have to participate. I don't have to sit there and call you certain things. I don't have to go to certain events. And you know what? I will reciprocate that to you. You don't have to participate in what I believe. However, if you want to have a discussion, I'm more than willing to have a discussion. That's how we learn. That's how we grow.
The point about the cross is so great. I think
Yes.
because it's like these norms have existed for religions since the beginning of time, and now all of a sudden gender is becoming the topic of the day, and all of a sudden it's like we're trying to twist things into meaning things that they don't mean. But yeah, all I have to say is I hope both those folks, both the kid and the girl, the lady there, start stacking gold and silver, because they're going to be first on the social credit score list. So
I know, right? Use cash.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the religious thing, and I guess being a religious person most of my life, growing up in religion, and then going to school and going to private schools, then go to other, and not a lot of people agreed, because obviously there's different religions, and there's Protestant, there's Catholic, there's Mormon, there's Jehovah's Witnesses, there's all these different types. And even within my family we had people that believed different religious things, and you know what you did? You just respected them as being different, and you said, okay, they believe something different, so what? And I never minded having those conversations with those people. Like, hey, why is it different? Why do you believe this? This is why I believe that. I didn't mind that. But I didn't go around and tell people, listen, Jesus Christ is the Lord and Savior, and he's coming to save you. So you have to believe this. And if you don't believe this, you're going to hell. So you really have to believe this. And I'm going to force this on you. No, because I understand that that's not what we do in America. I'm allowed to believe what I believe. You're allowed to believe what you're allowed to believe. Here's my problem. When you start using government, and when you start using education, when you start using all these different levers to force belief and force compliance, we have lost the plot. We have lost the plot of what America is supposed to be. And again, as I was talking about before about conservatives, we just wanted to be left alone. Well, I'm going to tell you what, everyone out there that's conservative, everyone who watched that show, you're not going to be able to be left alone. We're not. We're actually in a battle now. Our kids are in a battle. We have to fight for them. We're in a battle because these people are serious and they want to push this. And until we stand up and say no more, they're going to keep going until level heads say enough. You're right. We're going to do what we do. You do what you do. And you know what? We'll have spaces where we can all just meet and do things together. And you don't have to agree with what I do. I don't have to agree with what you do. As long as we're adults, who cares? Let's leave the freaking kids alone. Until we get to that point, we're in a fight. I don't know what to tell you. We're in a fight. And we better start pushing back because we're losing. When we're allowing schools to hide things from us that our kids are doing, we're losing. When we allow our kids to go to school and they're told they're horrible people, even though they're being nice people, just because they're like, well, you do you. I'm just going to do me and I don't want to participate. And you're a horrible person now. Kind of craziness is that. So that's why I'm in the fight. And a lot of people, we talk about this all the time, Jim. A lot of people like, oh, the world's tough. The world sucks. I don't know what I can do. Well, I can tell you what you can do. Go to school committee meetings. Your kid's going to school for 7 hours a day, 6-7 hours a day, having to deal with this crap. And you can't take 2 hours a month to go to a school committee meeting and sit there and hold them to account. You can't go to a board of selectmen meeting and hold those people to account. I mean, people ask, well, what can I do? I'm really not that important. Yes, you are important. You can show up. You can do something. If everyone starts doing something instead of feeling like they can't do nothing, you know what? Things are going to start to change. But until that happens, we can't sit there and we can sit there because that's what people are doing. But if you sit there like, oh, the world's going to crap and it's our fault.
Yeah, and from my experience too, it's very intimidating, and it's designed to be intimidating on the outside. But once you start getting involved and start asking questions, it's like a paper tiger. It's like
Yes.
things start falling apart. It's like
Yes.
all the everything starts to crumble. It's like when you start pushing back. I like this. It's like I say, it's like when we fight, we win. And that's exactly it, because a lot of these government institutions, they're just like paper tigers. It's just
Yes.
they exist because no one's ever questioned them and no one's ever pushed back on them, and then they just get bigger and bigger. But the second you start getting people involved, people pushing back that actually care, that want to
Yes.
move things in the right direction, then all of a sudden, all the truth comes out, and it's so easy to change the direction of a lot of these things once you get some good people involved.
I 100% agree, because a couple of the RTCs I work with, Dayton and Swansea, that's what they're doing. They're saying, listen, just showing up makes them afraid and makes them scared, because most towns, most school committees, most board of selectmen, there is no one there holding them to account. When a person shows up, when 3 people show up, now they're like, oh man, now people are watching us. So when they start getting questions asked them, they're like, oh man. And that's what we need to do. Just showing up. You don't even have to ask a question. Just show up.
Yeah.
And then if you know what, if there's something that's really good, you can ask a question, be like, why is this going on? Oh my gosh, like you said, and they don't wanna be held to account. And then you know what happens is the bad ones that are in it for the wrong reason. When they start getting that pressure, when you start holding them to account, you know what happens? It's time to be reelected. I'm not pulling papers. I'm not getting involved in this. This is too much work. It was
Right.
easier. It was easier when the state was telling me what to do. But now that the people who elected me are
Right.
telling me what to do, this sucks. So I'm out. And that's what we need to do. Like I said, you're telling people you need to go out and do something, right? A lot of people are like, Justin, that's real tough. But again, how can you sit there and complain about things and never try to fix it? I mean, maybe I'm a different cat. Maybe you're a different person too. That when we see things, we're like, that's not right, and we get involved. And we understand there's a lot of people that don't have that nature in them. But like I said, it doesn't take much. Support a politician, join an RTC, go to school committees, go to board of selectmen, ask questions, be a pain in the butt, find out what your unique specialty is, right? Something that you can bring and use it. I mean, I'm talking like an hour to a month for some of these things, and your kids are sitting there for 7 hours a day, 5 days a week, getting bombarded with stuff, and we complain, "Oh, it's tough." Well, you know what? Do something.
Which is a good segue into our next segment here, because our guest was a person that was retired and really didn't have any skin in the game, and thought that, hey, maybe there's something I can do here, and
Yes.
ended up getting involved, and it's kind of snowballed from there.
This week you had contacted me and said you met this amazing guy, and he's on the board of Register of Voters in Massachusetts. And I kind of sat there for a second. I'm like, board of registrars? I'm like, are people really gonna want to watch a show about this? And then when we got discussing what they do, his experiences, I said, oh my gosh, we definitely have to have him on. So without further ado, let us get Dan Fitzgerald on. How are you doing today, Dan?
I'm doing great, Justin. Thank you. Hi, Jim.
Good. Well, welcome to the show. First off, I just would like to ask you, what led you to seek out to be on the board of registrars, and what do they do? Kind of 2-part question.
Yeah, so I think initially I was retired, so then it was like, hey, try to maybe give back to the town or get involved in some sort of government body with regards to the town, a committee or a board. So that was the first piece. And then the election piece was interesting to me, not knowing much about elections, how they really worked outside of just being a voter. So both of those pieces were really what drove me to say, and there was an opening. There happened to be an opening in my town government with regards to it. So that just they all blended in to say, hey, I should do that. So I did.
Well, the interesting thing I found out, because again, I think a lot of people know a lot about politics and how it works, but I think there's so vast and so many different things that I didn't have an understanding of what the registrar does and how they're selected. And it was funny when you were talking to us early this week, you explained that you were unenrolled, and can you explain that a little bit more about how the roles are determined, who selects the people, or how it's supposed to be selected for this position, and how you got into it and were selected, and do you need any special skills or?
Yeah, no, you don't need special skills. So for me, as an unenrolled, as I say, for us, there was an opening, and I just put in through the regular process of anyone in Grafton that would get on a board or a committee. The things with the registrars, though, they are regulated by political affiliation. So typically what's supposed to happen is, and what probably did happen in my case anyway, is that the town clerk will put out a letter to both the two main parties, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, to see if they have candidates in their group, in their committees, that would like to be registrars. So I put my application having nothing to do with either of those things in as a candidate, and I was told, hey, you're the only one so far, but I believe my town clerk did a due diligence and checked with both the other town committees, and they didn't forward any names to be appointed. So as a result of that, by default, I was, as an unenrolled voter, I was allowed to take the position that was open.
That's awesome. Default, right? So here's something I'm just pulling up on the screen right now. So actually, if you do a Google search of registrars and their duties, it's actually, there's a lot of duties they have, and it's funny because when I was in the Air Force, a lot of people used to sit there and like, all these people over there do is this, like the clinic, all they do is this, or if it's the services people who made the food, all they do is make our food. And I used to tell people, I'm like, no, they do a lot more. The Air Force didn't make jobs for a person to do one thing, right? And it's the same thing in politics. I think a lot of times, like, oh, you're a registrar and all you do is this, and it's actually pretty involved. So I'm going to read through a couple of the duties that the registrars have, and then we can discuss how they've affected you and what you've done, if you've done these all or some of them. So they maintain accurate lists of registered voters in the town. They conduct elections. They accept nomination papers. They certify initiatives on referendum petitions, voter registration. Oh, let's stop there and let's see, because I know you're probably sitting there like, that's a lot of stuff. So have you had to do, when you conduct elections or whatever, I know we discussed it, you can't technically be involved, if I'm remembering correctly, like you can't technically be involved unless there's an issue.
Right. So, so from my town, the website had a lot of things in there that basically after a month, I realized we don't really do, whether it was what they used to do in the past as a registrar. But so as far as conducting elections, I was interested in that. I said, hey, can I go to the election? My first, right, here we go, right? We're going to have election in May. And it's like, hey, can I go and observe? And, the clerk basically said, no, that's not your job. You don't have anything to do with day-to-day, the actual operation of the election, the conducting of the election, because if something were to go wrong, a registrar really sits in judgment of how you remedy whatever goes wrong. So you kind of tainted if you actually have a hands-on piece with the election. So you have to stay detached. So, I think that's a brief description of how that tends to, how that works. So,
Okay.
yeah, so, and specifically for us, so we did have an incident where we got called in after an election. There was an issue with ballots that got stuck in one of the machines, and as a result of that, the total tally was off. And so the registrars had to sit and kind of observe how the clerk and her staff and the election workers were going to remedy that. And we observed that and make sure that it's on the up and up. So, it was, if I had been at that election, I would be tainted. I would have, whatever problem occurred there, perhaps, it could be said, well, you were part of that problem, so you can't really weigh in as an impartial judge, let's say. So, that was just one example of how that worked.
Oh, that's, it's funny because when you said that, it actually made sense. Like I initially thought like, hey, you'd have to be there to make sure everything, goes well or looks good and gives the visibility to people that things are going well. But when you explain it to us, I'm like, that makes more sense because you want to be impartial. You want to be, when something goes wrong, let's pull in these impartial people that will sit there and make sure that everything went smooth, or if there was an error or something that needs to be fixed, that it wasn't screwed up before and you might have potentially been part of it, or they could say you were part of it. So I think that's pretty interesting. Now, really quick too, you said you're unenrolled, and we also discussed how sometimes Republican town committees or Democratic town committees or whatever actually maybe get to nominate somebody. Can you explain how that process is supposed to work, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I don't. The specifics is the date. I probably won't get right, but so at some point towards the beginning of the year, either of those parties submit there's laws, right? So the registrar piece is pretty heavily regulated with Mass General Law, and
Yes.
so one of those laws talks about the town is supposed to send out a letter to the town committees and say, hey, if you have candidates you'd like to submit to be put in as a registrar, you send them in, and there's deadlines involved with regards to that. So it's, the law says 3 candidates, right? So the committees would submit those names of 3 candidates and get them to the town clerk, and they'd be available. So in our situation, I was appointed by the select board. So the town clerk would then turn over, and I believe for us, it's a little bit convoluted, but I think the select board actually is the one supposed to send out the letter since they do the appointment in my town. It's not always the case. Like I know of at least one town it's the town manager or the town administrator that does registrar appointments, but in our town, it's the select board. So those letters go out. If the town's committees return candidates, they need to return 3. If they get that done, then really that's the list that the select board should go by is the committee's list of what they send, as opposed to a random citizen asking to be put on that board. So that was my case, right? A year ago, I was just random, and neither of those committees apparently had submitted names of people. So as a result, that cleared the way for me to be appointed.
Well, I like that too, because again, we want people to trust the voting system. And how do you do that? Well, we could debate if we should be a 2-party or a 3-party system, if we should have more parties, but at least having the ability to have local committees say, hey, listen, this is the person we want us to represent us, because we know that they'll try doing the right things on both sides. I think that's something key. Now, another thing that we discussed earlier was the town clerk. Is the town clerk kind of in charge of the registrars, or do you work hand in hand with the registrars? How is that relationship? How is it supposed to work? And do you take responsibilities away, or you know what I mean? It seems like the town clerk is the main person that you all work or help out during this process.
Correct. The town clerk is the main head of all election pieces with regards to she goes from covering election workers, right? That's her responsibility too. She's completely in charge of the election piece. So with regards to us, in Massachusetts, it's a 4-member board. The town clerk is by default one of those members. And then the 3 other members of the board are appointed by the select board. So it's curious for us, or in my situation, you come on board and you're new and you're trying to follow along, and the town clerk has a pretty good handle on everything that's going on. And eventually you start to learn that if you educate yourself and you start to read about the laws, you understand the history of the registrars they were much more hands-on, but now in more modern times, it's turned more into like a rubber stamp. And actually they basically create a stamp for you with my signature, and it has to be stamped on some of the documents, the official documents with regards to elections. But for the most part, we don't have much to do with that. We forego the ability to have a hands-on day-to-day type of stuff with it and say, yeah, we believe you'll be doing the right thing, and if she needs to notify us about something, she will do that. But there's a lot of rubber stamping this job has transitioned into as far as being a registrar. So the registrars determined that. The town of Grafton select board, they wanted to have in-person early voting, but that had to come through the registrars. They can't just say, okay, this is what we want to do. We had to vote on that and make a vote. So that was one of the good things that we get to do. So things like that will crop up. This other piece about, overseeing a recount, right? So that was one of them.
Yes.
As far as, your relationship, you understand that the town clerk is the head of all election pieces. She's the chief election officer. However, you have the ability as someone on a board to make suggestions, make policy suggestions. And, hopefully you have a clerk that listens to those types of things. And my clerk has done that with me, certainly. So that's been good.
You say something interesting too, because I think in a town that I'm associated with, their board of selectmen actually, from what I understand, they were telling me their board of selectmen were the people who decided whether to have early voting or not. And, when you sit there and say that the registrars are supposed to do it, I kind of wonder sometimes in politics, because there's a lot of mechanisms in place, but not all politicians know the laws or follow the laws. Like I said, because some are new, some just never had to go through it before. So when certain things are presented, that sometimes, they overstep their bounds. So I'm gonna probably have to look into that more and be like, hey, was a registrar supposed to do that, not the board of selectmen?
Yeah, but so some, and again, I think this is to the point of it can be so. That may have happened in this case, and people are like, oh yeah, that was part of it, but the registrars are kind of not really looked at as an important position, so it kind of turns into, maybe they had that conversation. It's because the select board is involved. It would be much easier, certainly in a town of, that has politicians, select board members. They want to get out in front and say, hey, this is what we do, as opposed to registrars, which are typically just citizens of the town. They don't. For me, I don't have that political element, so it's easy maybe to just make it seem as though, even though there was more stuff going on behind the scenes and that registrars were involved in that decision, the select board saying, hey, look at us. That was kind of what we faced with our board, because in the end, we voted against it to have early in person for many reasons. But the select board were in favor of it. And that was, part of the politician piece. Every politician wants to go out and say, hey, I'm all for whatever voting we have. But
Yes.
the registrar's job really was to take for us, it was an assessment of cost. More importantly, it was an assessment of staff and how many election workers were going to be there. And we looked at a little bit of the past of the history of early in-person voting and whether it was really cost benefit analysis, a value. And, in this particular case, the board decided it was not for this particular election, right? This should come up again and we'll look at it again with maybe more information and maybe more feedback from the select board if that's the case. So, that's how that really worked. We're separate. It's like separation of powers a little bit. It's just like, we're not going to do it just because politically it's expedient. We're going to take a little bit of a harder look at it and try to come up with a more thorough decision.
So just going back, so anyone that's watching this right now and that's interested in becoming a registrar, can you kind of explain the process a little bit? So you mentioned that there's 4 registrars in town, and I think usually in a well-run town, they usually expire every year or so that one registrar rotates in and out every year. Some towns, I think they align all the expiration dates the same, but can you go over the dynamics around that? So what someone that's interested in becoming a registrar, what would they look at, and how would they get involved with that process?
So it seems like what's happening now is a lot of towns, from what I gather, their expiration term, your terms are 3 years. The town clerk is by default, as I said, a registrar, right? So that's typically your 3 citizens that are going to be registrars. They try to stagger your term so that with 3 registrars with 3-year terms, every year, typically one registrar would be coming up for reappointment. Then it turns into, for me, it was, okay, I got appointed maybe in March, and that June 30th, that seems to be the date that towns are using now, June 30th is the expiration. My term expired. Select board appointed me in March. My appointment expired that June, And I really for our town, I'm not so sure how it works for others, but I assume it's the same. I just submitted a letter for reappointment, and there was no other person that wanted to do it. So again, by default, I was able to take the next 3-year term, right? So my term now expires in 2 years. This year, our town is a little bit different. Something happened where, although in a lot of towns it's one every year, in our town we have 2 that are coming up for expiration this year. So one of those seats is actually open because the registrar resigned, and the other seat is just coming up by expiration. If nobody in the town asks to be a registrar, then again, if the person that's currently a registrar puts in a letter to say, yes, I'd like reappointment, he'll be reappointed by default. They're going to have to deal with the open spot. And so arguably, unless the committees, and I don't know, I'm not sure if the committees have names in the hat right now so that that select board can pick from them, but it could be just someone randomly. And you don't have to be involved with your town committee, right? You could have been, like, so say for my case, if I wasn't unenrolled and I was a registered Republican, and I was the only one to do it, I think I would have been appointed. I'm just a citizen. I'm not on I wasn't a name forwarded by the town committee, but people have political affiliations, just regular citizens. So I probably would have got that appointment anyway.
So I think we also discussed, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Is that you can't have, no, what you can't do is you can't overload a board, right? So really, on a 4-member board, you can't have more than 3 people. You can't have 3. You can have 2 of the same political affiliation, but you can't have more than 2. That way, so, there is this, much like it is for election workers, which I think people don't necessarily realize either. The town clerk tries to balance that too. When you go in to vote and you go to a table and you check in, arguably, you typically see 2 people sitting there. One of them they shouldn't be of the same party. They should be of different parties, right? So one should be a Republican. It's the same idea. It's checks and balances. Yeah. Same idea for the registrars, checks and balances. You'd like to have a registrar that's a Republican or a Democrat, vice versa. Ideally, if you had 4, 2 and 2 would be optimal. What you can't do is have 3. You couldn't have like 3 Republicans or 3 Democrats and 1 unenrolled or 1 of the other, or 4 for that matter. So the select board would be limited in who they could appoint based on what the makeup is of the board as it stands.
Well, the other thing we discussed too, and correct me if I'm wrong, is if you served on an RTC, like if you were a chairman or in a finance, you're precluded from being a registrar. They won't let you. You kind of have to. You can still be a Republican, a registered Republican, but you can't hold a political position in town. Am I correct in saying that?
That's correct. I think the terminology is on the executive board of one of those town committees, right? So you're on the executive board, you're out. One of the other interesting that came up too with regards to regulations, and these are all in the law. I know people you just got to kind of, it's crazy, right? Because a lot of the other committees or boards, it wouldn't have this type of regulation, but it does for registrars. So yeah, I'm trying to think of the other piece would be you need to be, so for a Republican or a Democrat to be considered under the umbrella of their RTC, putting their names forward, they have to be enrolled in that party for at least 2 years.
Oh yeah,
so,
that's right.
You run into a thing where somebody newly appointed as a new enrollee to the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, if it's less than 2 years, they can't be considered under that umbrella of it's a town committee appointment.
Now, sorry for cutting you off, but does that go for? So that's Republican town committee, but does that go for? Let's say I was unaffiliated with anything. I just 6 months ago became a Republican. I'm not in the RTC. No one's running for it, and is an open Republican. Could I do it in that capacity, or you had to have it for 2 years before you had to be registered?
To be honest, I think that would still disallow you. You'd have to, I don't think it matters if it's under that umbrella. It's a good question, but I think
it makes sense, right? Because I think maybe if you're in a political party and you're like, hey, we know this is coming up and no one's running. Hey, you go change your political affiliation to say you're a Democrat or say you're a Republican, and then when you get in there, so it makes sense.
So would it make a difference so I misspoke. It wouldn't make a difference if it's whatever the town committee, that wouldn't matter. They're going to look at that and say, nope, not 2 years. You can't do it.
Right. So again, I have the voters' duties up, or the registrar voters' duties up, and I'm just gonna ask you really quick if you've done some things. So I'll ask you, have you done it? You say yes or no, and if you have and you want to discuss it a little more. just let me know. So have you processed absentee voter applications?
No.
No. So again, I think some of these things on this list probably is the town clerk, because I know when I've dealt with the town clerks, they do a lot of this. So I'm sure some of these things you don't technically have to do. So, but for people interested, if they go see this list and like, I don't want to be processing absentee, you know what I mean? I just want to make them show they kind of know what they might be getting into.
Or vice versa, Justin, right? So when I read all those things, I was like, oh, great, I'm going to do this, that, the other. It's really not true. So, it works both ways. I felt like, hey, I'd like to be involved in registering voters. I mean, it can happen, right? So this is the give and take where it can happen. Now, if I pushed it and said, hey, by law, this is one of my duties and I should be able to do it.
Yes.
There's if people want to look at a very interesting case that happened in Amherst a couple of years ago, it was kind of like that, where the registrars there were basically trying to say we should be able to act independently. So it's a funny dynamic that the town council weighed in. It's a good story. It's a good little story about trying to see how that all works with the relationships with registrars, and perhaps maybe they have more powers than you would think. So this rubber stamp piece that I talk about, right? So that was one of the arguments out in Amherst, was that because the registrars allowed the clerk gave them permission to use their stamp, they basically forfeited, I guess, for lack of a better term, any type of claim that they should be able to do those things after, when all is said and done. It was curious, but so that type of stuff happens.
You brought up an interesting point too, where depending on the town clerk and the registrar and what sort of relationship there are ways that the registrar, there are things that the registrar can do to potentially become more involved in the process. And I think you were talking a little bit about your background, how you started off pretty much brand new, not knowing anything, and you were just kind of like listening in for a little bit. But then as time went on, you found ways to become a little bit more involved in the process. Could you walk through that a little bit?
Yeah, so for that piece, it's, as Justin brought up earlier, you feel out your relationship with your clerk and to see how it is, what some of the things she'd be receptive, she or he would be receptive to. So for me, it kind of worked out into suggesting things for our agenda. Right. So just like all your other town committees or boards, you submit an agenda 48 hours before you actually have the meeting. Usually your board or committee members will get a copy of it prior to it being posted. It needs to be posted. Right. So for us, we post it on the town website, and we would get a copy ahead of time. And so for me, my clerk was very good about, I would say, hey, could we talk about this, this, and this? Some of those things were things I personally observed at polls per se, let's say, or some of it was just stuff that I knew that, I wanted the people of the town to understand these are the things we do. Otherwise, it's just kind of a skeleton agenda, right? So, and my town clerk was great. She'd be like, yep, okay. She'd say, if you have any suggestions, but that was like a process, it wasn't like my first. So let's say my first meeting, there was an email that went out and said, hey, if you registrars have any things you'd like to see on the agenda, please send me an email. That was kind of like me saying, hey, can we do this? So but since that first time, then it's been a common thing where it's been allowed. So that's one example of how, you as a registrar can influence what goes on with what the clerk puts out for an agenda.
Now, we're peppering you with a lot of questions, and like I said, you're providing a lot of information, so thank you very much. So again, to kind of piggyback off of what Jim was asking too, typical duties that you have to do, like how much time do you invest? Are there meetings? Is there like a workload? I know you said you've done your own research on the laws and trying to figure out what you have to do. I think understandably a lot of people in any new job understand that's going to be an undertaking, but what are the typical duties that you have? And like I said, are there meetings? Do you have to go deal with the Board of Selectmen or the Select Committee often? Can you just give a little bit on that, please?
Does the state provide any training materials too? That's another question that goes with that.
So I've had some questions with regards to some of the things. So one of the state is the Division of Elections out of the Attorney General's office. So they typically do stuff through email. So if I've had some questions, and my clerk even says, look, if you have a problem, an issue with whether it's her view of something or, contact them. So she pointed out that was my contact point with regards to those questions. And I'm sorry, go ahead. I jumped over to Jimmy's
typical
thing.
duties, like typical duties, your workload, like
Yeah, so the
are there
workload.
meetings you have to attend?
Yep, the meeting piece is really, I mean, I guess it's kind of the clerk determines when we need to meet. Like, so one of the things was in town, they won they were awarded some money with regards to using it to go towards promoting elections in town, right? So that was an agenda item that the clerk wanted to talk to the registrars to see if we had any ideas about that. So I think depending on how active your clerk is and how active your registrars want to be, she could have meetings frequently, but for the most part, I think on average we have two. It's almost, there's going to be like mandatory meetings. So registrars are responsible to count overseas ballots. So that's one of the things that we would meet. Sometimes you don't get them, but you'll get that has a lot to do with the military piece, right? So when those ballots come in, then if they're not in by the day of the election, I think you have some leeway. It could be like a week after. So
Yeah, I think so.
the clerk schedules a meeting to say, hey, if we get any of these ballots, you folks got to come in and we got to count these ballots. So this year, this fall, we didn't have that. She didn't receive any of those ballots. So we didn't have to have that meeting, but it got posted as a meeting and like I say, but it wasn't necessary to have it. So those are the things that come up, again, so this particular year, it turned into, we had to have a meeting to decide if the registrars wanted to have in-person early voting, right? So I'm still learning about some of the reasons we have meetings. But, again, we go back to really the clerk and her staff or his staff are really the ones that are doing the day-to-day hands-on stuff. And it's almost like, well, we're all set. I imagine it's different for every clerk. Some clerks maybe want more involvement from their registrars, but certainly it doesn't have to be that way. It can be, hey, I mean, all you got to do, I suggest people go to their own town websites and look at your minutes and agenda and see, that's a good learning tool for anyone that wants to start out as a registrar. If you're interested, go to your town website, look at the agendas and the minutes and read some of the things they do. In my case, it was a little bit difficult because I think the less the better was the mentality, I think, where I am, right? It was kind of like, okay, we'll do the basic things we need to do, but for the most part, the registrars can, and maybe the registrars prior to me, that's what they wanted. They didn't want to be so involved. Like, they made it clear. It's like, hey, look, the less meetings, the better. So that might have been the case. I was kind of had a different attitude about it. So it's like, yeah, no, let's have six. Let's have a meeting a month. If she said, yeah, I would say, oh, great. And maybe we don't have much to talk about, but maybe we do. So yeah, that's kind of it. That's how that goes.
Thanks for providing the insight. I think, we talk about there's always a lot more ways to get involved than just voting. I think a lot of people, it's a shock when we tell that to people because obviously everyone puts on that sticker, I voted, and that's like kind of the way that they get involved. But then there's a lot of other ways that people can get involved, whether it's joining your local town committee, whether it's the DTC or the RTC. And getting involved in just local election stuff as well, whether it's an elected position or, something that gets appointed by the select board. There's so many other ways to get involved, and we encourage it. We recommend that to as many people that watch this and, that follow politics or just want to change the direction in Massachusetts as much as possible. It's like you got to learn about the different positions and, find a way to get involved other than just voting.
And, the other piece, the thing that goes hand in glove kind of with the registrar piece, and as a matter of fact, my clerk and I had a conversation that she felt maybe I'd be, I wanted to be a poll worker, right? So you can talk about poll workers, you have wardens and you have clerks, right? Yep. So we have, in my time, we have 5 precincts. So we have 5 wardens. And then you have 5 clerks. And so the warden oversees what goes in that precinct. Really, the clerk isn't down on the floor either. She's at her office and there'll be communication. So let's say you had a voter that came in and they didn't have them on the voting rolls. There'd be a conversation. The warden would step in. They fill out affidavits depending on the situation. Then the warden would try to either confirm that this was a registered voter that just didn't happen to be on the list by maybe a mistake, or so forth and so on. And so you also have with the wardens their clerks, and a clerk is really supposed to take note of everything that occurs. So you have, let's say you had a voter that came in and wasn't on the rolls, and now the warden steps in and says, look, we're going to try to straighten this out. We want you to vote. That, and really they err on the side of people voting all the time. But now the clerk needs to make note of all the little things that go on. And then the people at the tables, when you check in, a lot of times they'll call them inspectors, and so they're going to ask you your name and your address, and so then they'll check you in to vote and give you your ballot. And then after the elections, I know the terminology that's on our website is tellers. So maybe people that weren't involved in the people voting, but now they're going to come in and work on the counting of ballots. So like you say, Jim, it's just like, would that have been better for me? I kind of like registrar. I like to figure it out. I think I could be a poll worker, but sure, go out there, be a poll worker, start there. As someone that wants to get involved in the process. I mean, I know for me, even just being a registrar, I became much more confident. I know there's election issues around the country, but I became much more confident in how my town does it and really how the state does it. It's pretty impressive. It's really well regulated. Believe me, I was like, okay, I was skeptical, but nope, I've come around to understand that Massachusetts does a good job. They, from what I can see in my involvement in it, they really do a good job, and my town does too. So.
And I think that's an important point to note too, because that's one thing that's always been murky to me is like understanding that process. Like I want to understand what the chain of custody is on election day. Like I want to know where do those mail-in ballots go? Like would they get put in the drop box and they stay in there, and then who has access to take those out of the drop box? Who's watching them do that? Like those are things I think every town should really be making as transparent as possible, because we're at a stage in this country where it's like, we need to remove all doubt of any sort of shenanigans going on in the election process, and just having that all open to the public and just like having as many people involved in that, I think is going to build a lot more trust in the public and accepting elections. And we talked about in Massachusetts too, even if you have everything transparent. I mean, we talk about, some of the elections, like when Justin ran for office, we were waiting for the town to post the official election results for over a month after the election happened. And that's because some of the laws in Massachusetts, I think it has to be postmarked by a certain date. But if the mail comes in after it was postmarked, so it might take it a week or 2 weeks to come in, as long as it was postmarked by election day, then you're still allowed to count it. So, there's so many different variables that go into people not wanting to trust the election process. So I think as much transparency and as much people, as many people that can get involved as possible will help alleviate some of the concerns people have around the election process.
Absolutely. Justin asked me earlier too about training. So this year, my first year, I had got appointed before I could go to the training session for poll workers. But this year I was able to go. So someone from the state came and they talked about, some of the machines that each town uses and in the training piece with regards to that. But in that training too, I learned that, you can go to your polls early and watch to see. You can be an observer if you have concerns about how that works. I know, Jimmy, you talked about, wardens have a lot to do with when you talk about those ballots getting moved from A to B, wardens have a lot to do with that. So, right. So and it's a good question. I can tell you that as a registrar, I didn't oversee. So let's say, for example, you're going to have early mail-in vote, right? They're going to go to the clerk's office, and at some point those ballots have to be transferred because they're going to be counted on election day at the polls, at the precincts. So I don't know who, it's a fair question. And even as a registrar, I don't know who does that, right? So, you're relying on your town clerk to make sure that those decisions are handled correctly. And again, go into the polls early, see how they set up what they call zero the machines, right? To make sure that there's the voting machines, the tabulators that are used don't have numbers on them already. They run a tape that says 0, so you can see that and you can watch them. It's same thing at close of ballots. They have to run the tape again. You have a right to be there to watch what they do, right? So, and again, right, so that's part of the election piece. I vote. The only, as a registrar, I went and voted, but I'm not there in any type of administrative capacity. But as an observer, you can watch those types of things. You're allowed. You have a right to do those types of stuff. I just don't know. I've never heard anyone tell me a story. It's like, hey, I went to my polling place a half an hour early before them so I could see the 0 tapes. You know what I mean? There's things that people can do if you're skeptical or you want to learn more, or you want to see things. One of the things that came up for us too was they test the machines prior to elections, and I didn't necessarily get invited to that, where it wasn't like an email. We go back to like the communication piece. We're gonna do the tests of the ballot box, a week before. Well, that wasn't really. I didn't get asked to go to do that. The poll training this year was something that came up, and I said, hey, can the registrars go to this training? My clerk said absolutely. But I'm not so sure that would have been initiated by anyone in the clerk's office if you didn't ask. So I think I'm learning some of the things to say, yeah, you can be involved. You just got to be read a little bit and learn a little bit and try to understand. So,
Well, again, like what I like is, and I think Jim alluded to it a little bit earlier, is you're doing something. You're retired, and you said you wanted to do something. And a lot of people, it's when we do this show and people talk to us about it, I think they always think doing something is something super great. And I'm not saying what you're doing is not great, because trust me, it sounds pretty cool. I'm actually interested, and I kind of like hit myself that I didn't understand what you do. But what I try telling people is doing nothing isn't the option, right? If
I agree.
If you want things to be better, there's something you can do. And whether it's becoming a registrar, running for an office, helping people out, working on a poll, working the polls, right, on election day, there's always something you can do, right? Just do something, go out and look for it. And I think what happens is if more people do that and more people understand what's going on, how their government works, obviously that knowledge spreads. And when that knowledge spreads, like you both hinted to earlier, is the more people know about things, the more confident you feel that things are either going well, or if you don't have that confidence, then you can bring those issues up and try fixing things. So I think we can all sit there and say, hey, listen, our voice is being heard, and maybe our side is doing a bad job of messaging, and that's why we're not winning, and maybe we just need to do better. But at least we can be confident that when we go to vote, our voices are being heard. And like I said, I appreciate everyone that does anything. When I was running for office, people used to say, thank you for running. I'm like, no, thank you for being here, because even just showing up to help somebody, or showing up to be a registrar, or showing up to work a poll, that's a lot, because a lot of people don't want to give up their time to do it, but they sit there and they claim like, oh, everything's crappy, everything's bad. And I'm like, well, what are you doing? Right? Do something.
Right.
And like, well, what should I do? I'm like, it's not up for me, because I don't want to tell you. I don't know what you're interested in. I don't know what your time frame is. I don't know what abilities you have. It's up to you to sit there and like, what can I give? Because giving nothing shouldn't be the option.
Yeah, I agree. So I think what I don't see is younger people kind of being involved as poll workers or even registrars. That'd be nice to see. I realize it's difficult, with people working and so forth and so on, but younger people, seeing younger people come to the polls. The other piece is in being workers is that I don't think I'm going to go any further than the registrar. But however, what it does do is it allows you the opportunity to see how boards work and to the different rules and making motions. And I mean, you can watch it on TV, but until you're actually doing it, it's I fumbled through all sorts of stuff, and it's funny, you watch it on TV and go, this is easy, until you're actually needing to make a motion or take a vote or make a motion to adjourn, anything. It gets funny when it's in there, but it gives you, I think the registrar piece is good with regard to that, because there's not too many meetings. It's just like if we had 4 a year, I'd say that would be a lot, unless something happens at the election where as a result of that you have to weigh in on some sort of thing, but those things don't happen frequently, I don't believe. And so it gives you the sense of you can be part of a board and see how it works. If you then want to move on to something that's a busier board, things that meet more frequently that you're interested in. So I think it's a good stepping stone for that. My clerk even said as much. She goes, this is a good board to start with if you had thoughts of moving on to other boards, whether it be select board or any of the boards in the town.
Awesome. Well, Dan, I appreciate you coming on our show. I appreciate you explaining what the Registrars of Voters does in Massachusetts. I'm sure we'll probably have to have you on again in the future when you get a little bit more. And I'm sure if the next election people have questions or they're like, hey, I'd love to ask that guy Dan about this or that, or how I get involved or whatever. So, if they want to reach out, we can always shoot you an email and say, what's this? Or if they're interested. But, I just want to take a second to say thank you for doing this. I appreciate the time spending with us and also the time you're taking to do something outside of the norm, right? Doing something that you're participating, because we need, like I said, we need more people like you who are willing to step up and do something. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that you're too kind? It's really, you know what I mean. Again, it's not really it's. I love doing it. I love absolutely. I know for me it was difficult at first because my feeling was my clerk's busy and the other registrars are busy and they have lives, and so it was difficult to really get a good idea of what this was. I will talk to anybody about being a registrar. I love it. I think it's it's interesting. I'm happy they can call me all day long. I'm happy to talk to them about it because I do think it's important. It's they're
gonna run away from you. He's gonna talk to us about being a registrar.
Nuts, I know. It's crazy, but yeah. I love it. It's great. Happy to do it.
We need people excited like that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Dan. You have a wonderful day. Thank you.
You too. Bye, Justin. Thank you.